To this story now, COPE is in crisis. Infighting and leadership battles in the party have seen its support dwindle. Yesterday, a media briefing descended into chaos as COPE members physically assaulted each other. So how did the party, with so much promise that once held 30 seats in parliament, crumble? Well, former leader Mbhazima Shilowa speaks to us this morning. Good morning, Mr. Shilowa, and thank you very much for your time. Actually, I'm sure you're inundated with interview requests because there can be no conversation, honestly, around the possible demise of this party without context from its founders, or co-founders. Last night, Prince Mashele actually said the biggest problem beyond the leadership battles which many parties face, honestly, it's the political identity or lack thereof, where many have purely seen this party as nothing beyond a group of disgruntled ANC members post that 52nd ANC National Conference in Polokwane. Perhaps you can take us back and just clarify. Take us to the 1st of November 2008 in Sandton, where you had that national convention. What was this party to represent?
Thank you very much. I did hear what Prince was saying, but that's really more revisionism, because if you can go back and look at some of the writings by him at the time, you will see that he understood what is it that was raised at the November convention. And most of the issues that were raised at the November convention remains relevant today, and I'm sure they are consolidated even in COPE documents. I'll come back to your question now, but secondly, also I think what I was surprised Madisha couldn't say, but that's maybe because he walked out with Mr. Lekota, was that in May 2010, when that conference that was supposed to elect leadership was interdicted by Mr. Lekota and Madisha them, it did go ahead and convened as a policy conference and did adopt a number of positions. So to come back to your question, yes, we did say, firstly, was to ensure that we deal with key issues about the rule of law, respect for the Constitution. Secondly, we did deal with issues of what kind of economy was needed. You've got to go back and look at, other than political parties that spoke there were around 10 speakers, most representing different, diverse views about the economy, about issues of crime, social issues. So no, I don't think that was really the problem. The problem, as I say in my article today, has to do with the fact that, yes, when you start a party, and this applies to any party, you will have arranged leadership until you build structures. But once you have got your structures, you've got to allow the membership to be able to vote. And in that vote, they may retain the same leadership, some of the leaders, or bring in new people. And I think some of the leaders in COPE became allergic to that process. The same thing that Madisha is raising today of parallel structures. He was involved with Mr. Lekota in putting them together. I mean,
and that was the criticism.
Say,
that was the criticism.
Absolutely.
Apologies for interjecting. That was the criticism yesterday when listening to that particular interview, where Anele Mda also stated that no, for the longest time he had been part of the problem, that he created the situation that today now he seeks assistance in resolving.
Absolutely. You can't feed a monster and assume that it's not going to devour you at some other point. So the point I'm making is that obviously, these were the mistakes that were made. And then, of course, once you could not have a conference, they then decided, no, let's purge. So it's one thing to say we're not going to have a conference, but they also then purged most of the leadership that were there. And most of the people who were purged expelled or left, most of them were the people who were working on the ground, which is why, if you look at the results of 2008-9, when everybody was there, and you look at 2014, when many of us had long been expelled by 2011, you move from 36 to 4 and now to 2. And I can only conclude that it's going to be downhill from here.
If you're disputing this reasoning by Prince Mashele that perhaps it's a lack of political identity, and you say it was the infighting, the purging, as you say, but many political parties go through that. The Democratic Alliance goes through that all the time. But if the identity of the party is solid, it still continues. So you're saying here the identity was solid. They knew exactly what they stood for. Their messaging was refined in that convention, but yet somehow they continue to lose numbers. So what is it beyond the political infighting?
No, I think that, let me make this point. If the GA did not go into its conference and elect leadership a year or two after that formation, when that brought people like Dennis Worrell and other people, it would have faced a similar situation. And in fact, it did, because if you go and look, its membership went down to only a few people, which is how their leader, Zach de Beer, left the party and Tony Leon taking over. But because they were able to say, let's have an election, let's build structures, you're able to move forward. So, but the point I'm making is that if you think elections is what create problem, and that's why the narrative that says, no, it's fighting, jockeying for positions that destroys the party. It basically confirms that, therefore, democracy should not be followed. Democracy is a very messy thing. The ANC, it gets contested. Sometimes people fight. They get disbanded, but they continued. And I've got no doubt that COPE would have continued if we had been able to be allowed to have a conference, elect leadership, new, same one, but everyone would have felt they have a stake going forward, moving beyond initial stages of what people felt we needed a new home. They needed to feel that, remember, there are many people who were not there in the convention center. There are many people who were not there in Bloemfontein, but who voted for the party. But who, when they wanted to participate post the elections, we kept them out.
You know, I note that you say COPE would have continued, meaning you believe it died a long time ago, that actually when people are talking of its demise today, I note that you just said COPE would have continued, meaning you clearly don't recognize what it is today. And that particular piece you wrote, I actually like the circus analogy, that particular piece from this morning speaks of a leadership that tried to return it to its former glory but could have never survived, when you speak of Willie Madisha and Mr. Likota. But you also refer to yourself and Mluleki George as pretenders. Talk to me about this.
Yeah, no, you see, I use those analogy. Remember, when you have a leadership, the rest that contest, they are regarded as pretenders to the throne, which is why I use the same thing now with regard to Madisha. The reason when I say it died a long time ago is that the minute you don't have structures on the ground, the minute you are not capable of winning and being in provinces, the minute COPE could not retain being the official opposition in the 6 provinces it was in 2009, it was inevitable that it was going to die a natural death. It's only that it seemed for many people, and I know people say, no, it's now dead. But you can go back and look, dinner tables and Twitter. Most people have long accepted that, look, it had died. and that really the two are just now fighting over a carcass.
It's that final nail in the coffin, as some said last night. I also listened to Anele Mda, the founding member as well as former youth leader. She also says that she doesn't even believe, as much as Willie Madisha is so optimistic, she doesn't believe that South Africans would actually give their votes this time around in 2024, or that they would ever see any support to the extent of the support they saw in 2009. Do you think there can be no comeback from this?
There can be no comeback. But, you know, I'm not in the party. They may know something that she doesn't know that I don't know. And that's why all I'm really saying is that, for me, my suggestion to them would be the following. You don't want Madisha to oust Lekota through some motion of no confidence and or through machinations. If I was them, I would say, right, let's bring the conference that is due next year. Let's bring forward to this year. Let's go to the membership. Let's ask the membership, who are we? Where are we? Where do we want to go to? How do we move forward? What leadership will we need? And it may be that conference that may decide, you know what, let's close shop, let's merge with other parties, or we'll say, Phoenix-like, we will rise.
Now, it's honestly very unfortunate that we speak of COPE, or many speak of COPE in these terms, because that possibly, this possibly signals an end of an era, because when many spoke of black intelligentsia, it really was going to be that strong opposition to the African National Congress. I mean, the caliber of people that had left the ANC then to join COPE, honestly, it was what many say was black intelligentsia.
Indeed, but I think it was not only people who left COPE, because there were a few prominent people that left the ANC, that went into COPE, but unbeknown to many people, there were many black people, professionals, white people who were not in leadership positions, but who were out there contributing, both in terms of resources for the organization, but also in terms of ideas. And most of those people now stand outside there disillusioned with politics. Some obviously would have gone back to the ANC, but people who went back to the ANC are people who were in leadership positions in the ANC. And the funny part is that the people who went back to the ANC were the people who said, some of us were moles of the ANC and were therefore doing the bidding for the ANC. We remain outside of the ANC. They have gone back. So yes, indeed, there are many black professionals. I hope they may be lost to party politics, but that they are not lost to politics itself in terms of playing a role in building our country. Because yes, party politics is important, but party politics is not the beginning and the end.
Now, to the current political climate, what do you make of what we saw in Parliament this week? I mean, it's something that has become a lot, quite often. It's very familiar. It happens quite often that the House descends into chaos, but one would have assumed that perhaps they would have learned from what happened in the Zuma era, that perhaps they wouldn't continue in that fashion, even if perhaps they seek answers or whatever the case may be. Do you think this is what South Africans must brace themselves for going forward? That accountability will actually see this level of rigor, that there will be that robust debate, but they'll even take it to the lowest of lows where they insult each other?
Obviously, one would prefer a situation in which there is robustness, there's even strong words, but no insult, no disruption, that it would not be necessary that rules are disregarded to a point where people are brought in the police to try and move people out. That if there's a transgression and the speaker says, move out, you refuse, they warn you, you refuse, and they say, Sergeant at Arms, please take the person out. People are supposed in any democracy to walk themselves out. So I think those things are to be expected. Secondly, it's inevitable because, you know, leave aside Ramaphosa or even Zuma. anywhere else, questions will be asked, but leaders often decide, I will answer it my own way, sometimes evade it, sometimes obfuscate. That's what happens. You can go and look whether it's Europe, whether it's the UK, whether it's in the US, or even here in Africa. And to an extent that with Zuma, parties went to court to say that, well, there are things which are not moving on with Mr. Ramaphosa. The leaders have already said we're putting in place a Section 194, I think. And if that section is already, now being moved, yes, they must ask for questions, but they also have an opportunity by today to put together a team which will probe whether or not there's a prima facie case. It will go to them. They will decide. Then Parliament will vote. It may vote in favor. It may not vote against. The sense I get is that obviously political parties will always play politics. They would be happy to further weaken the ANC. Some of them are doing it to further factions in the ANC. Others are doing it because with 2024 in mind, you must keep the ANC weakened. And I understand it.
Mr. Shilowa, thank you very much for your